All right, you two were to have evaluated the Salem witch trials, explaining why it happened by looking at the different evaluations that I gave you at the beginning of this examination of the Salem witch trials. So, whose paper would you like to hear? Okay, Lydia, would you read yours, please?
My whole paper? Okay, can I just like summarize it?
Summarize.
Okay, so basically what I said was like the only logical explanation to me would be like the supernatural aspect of it. And I said that I like basically like described like how it all started and like how like at first they just like got together and were like messing with magic with like Tituba and stuff. However you say it. And
Tituba.
Tituba.
That's
And
how
like,
I say it.
yeah.
I may not be right either.
They got, at first it started out innocent, but like, but then like they started getting in deeper and then like, all like the satanic magic and stuff.
So why did the girls experience the things that they did? What caused all these activities among the girls?
I just said that like, they got in so deep and like, they just messed with it and messed with the magic and stuff.
Okay. Did anybody take it a step further and tell us why those things happened? Sophia?
I just said that they were involved in like satanic worship and stuff like that, and that it was like the work of like the devil doing it, not like specific.
And let me clarify. By satanic worship, you don't mean that they were actually going out in the woods and offering sacrifices to Satan. You simply mean that they were esteeming demonic activity or satanic activity. Well, yeah, but we don't know that they did that. Okay, so anybody gets the wrong idea. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that was pretty much what it was like I had like the same thing as her, but I incorporated like an aspect.
Okay. All right. Anybody else say supernatural and maybe have some more explanation?
Well, I had that like it was supernatural and it was Satan like attacking the Puritans because they had a lot of influence at that time. So like he was trying to get rid of them, and then he kind of succeeded in that. But then I also think that it was a partially mass hysteria because it was like this happened and it started out really small, and then people got scared, and more people were accused just because people were scared, and so like it kind of was a mixture of both. It was supernatural and then it was made worse.
Okay, good. If I can summarize your summary, you put the aspect that this was a satanic attack upon the Puritans. And then secondly, that it starts out as girls involved in magic things and demonic activity, but then that added on to that was a hysteria, which was not necessarily demonically inspired, but just simply people being scared and accusing one another because they were afraid. Okay, that's good. Good evaluation. Anybody else? All right. Do you have something different than supernatural or something added to supernatural?
Like on the supernatural because like I'm reading for my report. I'm reading a book about the Salem witch trials, so I was like comparing the stuff like we've been talking about to the book, and like it has actual things like that the people back then like wrote or said and stuff like that. So there's this one from Anne or something. Yeah. And it was like years later after this happened, like 1706 or something, and she was saying like she knew like she realizes now that back then when she was accusing all these people of being witches, that it was like the devil doing it to her, and like she was apologizing to the family of like Rebecca Nurse or something. She got hung, and so she was like apologizing to like her family because she knew like now she understood that she was innocent, but like it was just the devil manipulating her, and she like couldn't do anything about it.
Good research. I'll be citing that letter myself today. All right. And now, did anybody pick other explanations besides the supernatural? Now, Michaela introduced something that was not totally supernatural. That is the mass hysteria. Did anybody else either say it's not supernatural at all, it was all this, or you combined one of the other natural explanations with supernatural? Anybody fall in either one of those categories? Okay. Now we'll see my evaluation. Would someone get Steven?
Just want to make sure you put these in a binder.
Yeah. Don't feel like your essay is of less value because I didn't collect it and read it. Keep it, because this kind of issue comes up once in a while when you're talking to people. Sometimes Christians don't really know what was going on, and certainly non-Christians don't know the true story, especially if they've seen a play or movie like The Crucible, which totally distorts everything, and other. Well, you know how it is when movies get a hold of historical events anyway. They usually change things, and especially when it has to do with a Christian perspective. In fact, just as an example, I started listening to a podcast this morning by Al Mohler, who is one of the leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention. He's president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, I believe it is. Great speaker, great a person has great observations about our culture and so on. But he was talking about the very much watched Downton Abbey on PBS. Have you ever seen that? It's about the British during the early part of the 20th century, early 1900s. They talk about what a great show it is. The costume period, costumes of the period, and the manner, all the different things to show you how it's like. But he says there's one thing missing. There's nothing there about Christianity. And Christianity did have a part of early 20th century England, and yet there's nothing there at all. So whenever you're watching anything, you may not get the exact representation of what happened, and that's certainly going to be true with this. All right, so let's look together at my evaluations concerning this event. Now, as you know, the meetings of the girls included a number of different occultic practices. So no matter how innocent the meeting of the circle of girls began, it was nothing short of spiritual seances. They were holding spiritual seances, which include palmistry, trying to read palms, fortune telling, necromancy, which is communicating with the dead, magic, spiritism, voodoo, and spiritual seances. So these are some of the elements of what they were doing as they were meeting together. Just in case you were dozing off. Now, it's possible that the circle was originated for the purpose of satisfying Mrs. Ann Putnam's thirst for the occult. Quote, Mrs. Putnam was about 30 years of age. For 6 months, she had been constantly absorbed in what was then, as now, regarded as spiritualism. Spiritualism is trying to contact the dead spirits. Her house had been the scene of a perpetual series of wonder, supposed to be disclosures and manifestations of a supernatural character. So she may have been the one that kind of pushed this originally. Pastor Paris noted that means were used, quote, to raise spirits and apparitions in no better than a diabolical way, unquote. It becomes apparent that the girls purposely came together to search the mysteries of the occult world to which Tituba, or Tituba, as some people might say, gave them access. So it all centers around what they hope to get from Tituba. It's apparent that Tituba taught some forms of West Indian voodoo, a type of religion that taught communication with evil spirits and normally ended in a state of demon possession. So the voodoo she knew and was teaching, that in the West Indies, their purpose in practicing what they did was to get to the point where they finally would be demon possessed. That was their goal. And that's what she was teaching the girls. Possession is such a part of voodoo that one author states, the number of people subject to possession is too large for all of them to be labeled hysterics, unless the whole population of Haiti is to be regarded as prone to mental disorders, unquote. In the ceremony of voodoo, possession takes place as the climax and culmination of the ceremony, and practically all are involved with their own personal demon. The involvement of Tituba with the West Indian religion of voodoo certainly meant that she was familiar with the deepest forms of the occult. It should be no surprise that the outcome was possession by evil spirits. The possibility of demon possession. Mather spoke of demonic possession in the colony and lays the blame to young people who, quote, had been led away with little sorceries wherein they did secretly those things which were not right, unquote. Thomas Battle, a Boston pastor, concurred. He said, these afflicted children, as they were called, do hold correspondence with the devil, even in the esteem and account of the Salem gentleman. For when the black man, in essence, say these gentlemen, the devil, does appear to them, they ask him many questions and accordingly give information to the inquirer. And if this is not holding correspondence with the devil and something worse, I know not what it is. Other contemporary writers sustain the same notion. This is a summary of what other writers said. Imagine, for instance, how easily the finger of witchcraft could have been pointed back at the afflicted girls themselves. But remember, they believed that a person couldn't bring stuff upon themselves. And so they discounted that. It was they, after all, who first began to toy with the supernatural. At least one neighboring minister, the Reverend John Hale of Beverly, eventually became convinced that a large measure of blame rested with these girls who, in their, quote, vain curiosity to know the future condition, had tampered with the devil's tools, unquote. And Hale's judgment in the matter was shared by his far more influential colleague, Cotton Mather, who pinpointed as the cause of the outbreak the conjurations, he calls it, of thoughtless youths, including, of course, the suffering girls themselves. As early as 1689, Mather had suggested that afflicted persons might in some way be responsible for their own torments, and that such affliction might in itself occasionally be evidence that the sufferer had had dealings with Satan. Now see, if that had become the dominant way of thinking, it would have changed the whole situation entirely. If they had originally recognized that the afflictions of the girls might have been brought upon themselves by themselves, it would have changed everything. But they did not yet believe that. Cotton Mather did think that beforehand, but that hadn't become common way of thinking. So the Salem witch trials, we have an impersonation of innocent people, we have willing vehicles of Satan, and what I would contend and what I was hoping maybe some of you would get to as to why these things were happening to these girls is it seems to me from the activity that I saw in the description of these girls and the activity that I have read of people that are demon possessed around the world, that they're very similar, and you could say the same. And so it's my belief that these girls were demon possessed, that there were demons within them causing them to see these things, to experience these things, and for all the things that were happening to them. Stephen?
This is sort of a deep question, but do you just like sometimes get randomly possessed, or do you have to be like involved?
No, it takes an action on your part. You have to, in essence, willingly invite that demon, that spirit. You may not recognize it as a demon, but you are opening yourself up to it. And what we'll be looking at here is that the activities in which they were involved was an open invitation for spirits to come in. That's a good question. All right, so as we look back, we see four. Let's see if I want that yet. Okay, not there yet. The young women who had acted as accusers testified that specters tormented them. But Mary Herrick, who had accused Mrs. Hale, called it, quote, a delusion of the devil, unquote, by which she meant that the specters were impersonating innocent people. So the specters, the spirits, looked like people, and that's why they accused that person of being a witch, because the spirit looked like that person, but in reality they were impersonating innocent people. By the way, as a side note, that's what happens if you are involved in something like a seance or dealing with what's called a medium who contacts the dead. Sometimes spirits appear. Sometimes they tell people things as maybe a relative or someone. They are not the dead relative. They are impersonating a person who is no longer there. They are impersonating dead people. Yes?
Is that what the Addams family demon possessed?
Well, that's what was my concern a little bit with the Addams family. But that was done in such a way that it was actual dead people coming out of the tombs, I guess. And so it might be excused in the context of a fantasy comedy play. I don't know. I might not have done. I enjoyed it very much, but I maybe that would have been enough for me not to have done that play. I don't know. To me, it's kind of on the line. But sometimes there are things projected in, like for a few years ago, there was a play produced. Maybe some of you were in it. Fairy tale one. It had magic in it. There was a witch that was not very good at it, and things like that. That was in a context of a fairy tale, not in the context of something which was real life. I have real problems with encouraging witchcraft in real life situations. In a fairy tale situation, it's understood that this is made up. And so I think you can make a difference with that. Okay, I won't go any further than unless you want further clarification. All right. Now Ann Putnam, who Jessica read earlier, was a ringleader, and she confessed to being a willing vehicle of Satan. I don't want to repeat everything that Jessica said, but try at the high points here. I desire to be humbled before God for that sad and humbling providence that befell my father's family, and so on, that I, being in my childhood, should by such a providence of God be made an instrument for the accusing of several persons of a grievous crime, whereby their lives were taken away from them, whom now I have just grounds and good reason to believe they were innocent persons, and that it was a great delusion of Satan that deceived me in that sad time, whereby I justly fear I have been instrumental with others, though ignorantly and unwillingly, to bring upon myself and this land the guilt of innocent blood. And she goes on to talk about how there was no malice, there was no ill will towards people. They were simply deceived by Satan to do the things that they did. I desire to lie, in that I was a cause with others of so sad a calamity to them and their families, for which cause I desire to lie in the dust and earnestly beg forgiveness of God, and from all those unto whom I have given just cause of sorrow and offense, whose relations were taken away or accused. And then that was read before the congregation in 1706, and she acknowledged it. So she confessed that Satan had tricked her into accusing Rebecca Nurse. The evident sincerity of the apology of Ann Putnam and the fact that the congregation accepted it and her is the final evidence that the behavior of the afflicted girls cannot be explained as fraud. In other words, one of the things that people look at is that they say, well, the girls were just tricking people. Well, not according to Ann Putnam, and not according to the congregation that accepted what she said. The community in general, including members of the Nurse family, had decided that the girls had been deluded by Satan. The manifestation of fits, trances, and convulsions is consistent with known phenomena of demonic possessions. Beyond such were physical torments that could not have been self-inflicted. I think that struck you as we went through the different afflictions. Someone wrote this: these children were bitten and pinched by invisible agents. Their arms, necks, and backs turned this way and that way. That's not something a person can do to themselves. Judge Sewell confessed publicly that he had been part of the shedding of innocent blood, as did John Hale, because of the lack of proper evidence. And Judge Sewell also wrote a confession. In fact, he observed annually in private a day of humiliation and prayer during the remainder of his life, to keep fresh in his mind a sense of repentance and sorrow for the part that he bore in the trials. On the day of the general fast, that is a day of fasting for everyone, he rose in the place where he was accustomed to worship, the Old South Church in Boston, and in the presence of the great assembly, handed up to the pulpit a written confession, acknowledging the error into which he had been led, praying for the forgiveness of God and his people, and concluding with a request to all the congregation to unite with him in devout supplication, that it might not bring down the displeasure of the Most High upon his country, his family, or himself. He remained standing during the public reading of the paper. This was an act of true manliness and dignity of soul. And in his diary, someone found this under the date of April 23rd, 1720, 30 years later. And he cites a history of New England that someone had written. He writes that his name is mentioned in this history. And he says, the good and gracious God be pleased to save New England and me and my family. The jurors themselves confessed to satanic delusions by which they were instrumental, though ignorantly and unwilling to bring upon ourselves and as people of the Lord the guilt of innocent blood. Unquote. Okay, so there are four possibilities of culpability. And think through this and you'll see why I arrive at the conclusion that I do. First of all, if the agitations of the afflicted were voluntary and artful, in other words, if the girls were just doing it themselves as an act of rebellion or to trick people, the blood of the innocent certainly lay at their door. And if they were guilty of the deaths of people because they were just pulling a trick on people, then they would certainly be guilty at least of manslaughter. But what is manslaughter? Are you familiar with that term? Everybody know what manslaughter is? All right, would they not be guilty of manslaughter if they intentionally were tricking people and people died? Yeah. Secondly, if the agitations were not purposeful and yet not supernatural, the girls should have been treated as lunatics. If they were acting this way but weren't doing it on purpose, then they must have been crazy. Does that make sense? If it was not supernatural, they must have been lunatics. Thirdly, if one acknowledges that supernatural forces were at work in Salem, then there are only two possibilities. Either the girls were bewitched, as they claimed at the time, that witches were doing it to them, or they were demon-possessed. If they were bewitched, which they said during the trials, they were innocent victims. If they were demon-possessed, they were to blame for their own afflictions as well as the lives of innocent neighbors. And it is, in fact, this position that the community took following the episode. When they look back at the facts, they said, none of these are true. this one is what rings true. These girls were demon-possessed. Any question about the logic behind the different possibilities? Did you get it all? All right, in conclusion, the afflictions of the young girls involved were real, recorded by a number of people. The afflictions began because of the girls dabbling in the occult with Tituba. That seems beyond questioning as well. The characteristics of the girls' afflictions are very similar to the characteristics of other documented cases that involve demonic possession or oppression. The post-trial confessions were that they had been deluded severely by Satan. Most of the community realized afterwards that the girls were probably demon-possessed and that innocent blood had most likely been shed. Some of those convicted were undoubtedly involved with the occult, but most of those hanged were probably innocent. And then just to have perspective, understand that Salem was not unique with regard to the demonic possession of young girls. It's not the only place that it happened. Devin.
If it's not the only place, why is this the main one that people think about?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure I know the answer to that, except this somehow this gained notoriety. This became well known. And maybe it was more. Maybe there were more people involved here than in some other places. But we find that it's not only in this time period, but later on. It seems as because a lot of the native tribes were involved in occultic activity, and so when there was contact with them, sometimes that came across the people that were on the frontier as well.
Okay, and then I read 150 of this because
Any other questions about what's been said here? All right, now we can't look at something like this and not learn some lessons. And I think you probably have thought some lessons already as we're going through it, but I want to get a little more specific. Okay, the first lesson is that people who are striving to follow God are not immune to satanic delusion. The people who were in the jury, the people who were the prosecutors, were attempting to follow God, and yet they were deceived by Satan. So just because someone is a spiritual person doesn't mean they can't be deceived. Secondly, the occult is nothing to play with. And I can't emphasize that enough to you. The occult is nothing to play with. For example, games like Dungeons and Dragons, which maybe is not as popular as it used to be. I think it's still around. There may be other games around like that that I don't know about. But I know Dungeons and Dragons contained real spells. The spells that are in there were taken from the Satanic Bible. They are real. Yes.
didn't the guy make a comment about that? And then they turned into a movie.
I think there was a Dungeons and Dragons movie, but
It was based on the comic.
Could be. Anything that has casting of spells on one another, it's something to stay away from. Sometimes teenagers get involved with Ouija boards. They think it's fun. You know, they put your fingers on this and ask questions, and it goes different places. And it may be that most of the time, it is just your fingers that are making it go. But there are times when it's not your fingers. It is opening yourself up to satanic, demonic, spirit involvement. I'll try to tell you a quick story of what happened at the college that I attended, Christian College. Happened the year before I got there. So this was during the year of 1967, 68, I believe is when it happened. A number of students on campus got involved with Ouija boards. There was a group of girls in the girls' dorm that got together one night, and they thought it'd be fun, light candles, and we'll get around the Ouija board and we'll ask the questions. And so, like normal, they're asking questions: who am I going to marry, and stuff like that. But then one of them asked a serious question: is Jesus really the Son of God? And suddenly, there was a feeling in the room that made them very uncomfortable. They said, "We better stop this." They got scared. So they all went to their separate rooms. The girl in whose room it took place is double rooms like most, but she was gone for the weekend, and so the young lady was alone in the room. After she got in bed, she heard a knock on her door. So she got up, opened the door. Okay, there's nobody there. All right, one of the girls played a trick on her. So back to bed. She got back in bed, heard a knock again. Went to the door, nobody there. Okay, all right, this is funny. All right, now I'm going to scare them. So she decided to wait by the door for when he came and knocked again. She heard a knock on the door, immediately opened the door. There's no one there. The security guard who went around that night and always checks all the unit doors to make sure they're locked and the doors into the dorm. He had gone around at, trying to think whether it was, at 1 hour of the night, he went around and all the doors were locked. A couple hours later, he went around, the doors were unlocked. Strange things were happening on campus. It got so bad that the administration decided we need to address this in chapel. And so a professor that I had, Dr. Robert Klimacki, spoke in chapel. And before chapel started, as he was getting ready to speak, there was somebody screamed. And I thought, okay, somebody's trying to be funny. Go on. So he spoke against involvement with this kind of stuff. And at the end, when he was praying, I'm told that there was a loud shriek from behind the stage where he was speaking, behind the curtains. And the thought was, who would be so brazen as to fool around with something like this? So they ran backstage quickly, and there was no one there. That pretty much put the scare into everybody on campus to stay away from this stuff. It is serious. It can't happen. Just don't mess with it at all. All right? In fact, Mr. Bell worked at the factory, the Parker Brothers factory that produces these, and he could tell you a lot of strange things happen in the production area where they were making these things. You go to any toy store, you find them on the shelves. They're all over, and they're basically selling access to demonic activity. Possible. I mean, I'm not saying every Ouija board comes with its own special demon, but I'm telling you, a lot of strange things have happened with it. I've heard of people that are burning their Ouija board, heard screams, saw some unusual things. So just stay away from it, Steven.
Someone told me that they sold those at Barnes and Noble.
They sell them any place that sells games.
They had them at Toys R Us.
Yeah, Toys R Us had shelves of them, especially this time of year. All right, next. When confronting evil or the appearance of it, we must be careful to follow biblical instruction. This is what they failed to do. They failed to follow the biblical instruction of having 2 or 3 witnesses, but instead believed evidence that they should never have followed. Of course, things like crystal balls, something to stay away from as well. Make sure we center our beliefs on the Word of God. So say no.
Oh.
To
Did you get that
Steven.
from a horror movie?
Steven?
What do you think about magic 8 balls? Or is it just like
That can be just a fun thing. I don't think that, I mean, those are just, nobody takes those too seriously, I don't think. We sports, however, maybe. There's a assignment on the board. Read and take notes on pages 69 to 71 for tomorrow. 69 to 71.